And this
Can I access the shear now? You said you
last
got
week's
stuff
one.
with,
No,
oh,
I was still having problems converting it to put it on the website. And then with being out of town on Thanksgiving, I forgot to try
well,
again.
if it ever becomes available, I do want to see it.
Okay, I will, when I post this one, I'll try to get the last week's one up also.
Thank you.
Okay,
Do we have?
so this
Yeah.
is,
I have them right here.
Oh,
this
okay.
is totally lifted from somebody else, from Rabbi Daniel Feldman. Rabbi Feldman is a Rosh Yeshiva at Yeshiva University. He's someone that I know in a few different ways. He was an advisor in NCSY when I was an NCSYer, and he married a friend of mine. So someone that I love learning his Torah, and I thought that this idea just really jumped out and spoke to me very strongly. I hope it will speak to you as well. It's definitely, we're going to start in the Parsha, but you'll tell me how, if there's any element of pshat in what we're going to do, and then we'll transition to connecting it to Hanukkah, and that's going to be really more of a Hanukkah shir than a Parsha shir, but we are grounded with Yosef. We always read the story of Yosef in Hanukkah time. Whether it's Parsha Vayeshev or Miketz, it always comes with Yosef. I believe last year in our Parsha shir, we looked at some of the connections between Yosef and Hanukkah. There are many, and we'll look at one more tonight. And it's interesting also, the Gemara, when the Gemara in Masechet Shabbos talks about the Neirot Hanukkah, the laws of, what is Hanukkah, how do we do it, what do we have to do? In the middle of it, it interjects and it tells us about Yosef. So there's some fundamental connection going on between Yosef and Hanukkah. You'll see if what we're going to do tonight plays into that, or if you think this might be taking it a little too far. In any event, I hope it'll help us find some inspiration for Hanukkah this year. So Parshat Miketz begins. Remember the end of last week, we left on kind of a cliffhanger. Yosef was in jail. There was the butler and the baker who were in jail with him. They each have a dream. Yosef interprets the dream. He tells the butler that or the cupbearer, or whatever exactly his position is, that he'll be released from jail and return to his position serving Paro. And then Yosef says, and please, when you're out, remember me and tell Paro about me, so that hopefully he can release me as well. Rashi says for this, Yosef was punished and he had to spend an extra 2 years in jail. He didn't have enough trust in God that he was going to be saved without the butler's interjection. So there's a whole Torah on that also. But anyway, so in the beginning of this week's Parsha, after 2 years, Paro has his 2 dreams. No one's able to interpret it, and the butler all of a sudden remembers, oh yeah, there was this Hebrew slave in jail with us, and he was able to solve my dream, solve the baker's dream. Maybe he'll have some luck with your dream as well. So that's where we're going to pick up with the butler. Source number 1. Vayidaber sar hamashkim et Paro leimor chatza'ai ani maskir hayom. Paro katzaf al avadav vayitein oti b'mishmar beit sar hatavachim oti v'et sar ha'ofim. Anachoma chalom habalayla achad ani v'hu ish kapitun chalomo chalamnu. Right, telling you what I just told you. He remembers, oh yeah, I was in jail. I had a dream. The baker was in jail. He had a dream also. And our dreams were interpreted correctly. They came true. Vishami tanu nar ivri eved l'sar tabachim. V'nisaper lo v'iftar lanu et chalomotenu ish kachalomo patar. And there in jail with us was a Hebrew child, lad, who was slave to the butcher masters. And we told him our dreams, and he solved it. Vahi kasher patar lanu ken hayao tiyoshiv al kaniva oto tala. It came true exactly as Yosef said it would. By shlach Paro, by kra et Yosef yaritzuhu min habor, vayigalach vayichalif simlotav vayavo el Paro. So Paro sends and he brings Yosef, and they run him from the pit, from jail, and he gets a haircut, and he's shaved, and he changes his clothing, and he comes to Paro. Okay, the story's good for us. We're all remember this.
You might just want to change it to Bereshit 41 instead
do
of
I
9.
put 49? I'm sorry.
No
That is
problem.
totally my mistake. Okay, 41.
No, just in case, somebody wants to study it later or something.
All right. Thank you.
Sure.
So we are going to pick up on the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah. The Gemara Rosh Hashanah tells us, right, there's an ongoing debate. I believe we've discussed this debate many times. Was the world created in Nisan or was the world created in Tishrei? And so the rabbis in the Gemara here are going back and forth, bringing proofs. It was created in Tishrei, it was created in Nisan. And so we come to the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, B'Tishrei nivra ha'olam, B'Tishrei noldu avot, B'Tishrei metu avot, B'Pesach nolad Yitzchak, B'Rosh Hashanah nifkeda Sarah Rachel v'Chana, B'Rosh Hashanah yatsa Yosef mibeit Asurim. Rabbi Eliezer tells us that the world was created on Tishrei, and on Tishrei, in the month of Tishrei, the Avot, the patriarchs, were born and they died. Yitzchak, however, was born on Pesach, so I'm not sure who he means by the Avot, by the patriarchs. Rosh Hashanah, Nifkeda Sarah, Rachel, v'Chana. On Rosh Hashanah, Sarah, Rachel, and Chana were all remembered. These are all 3 women who struggled with infertility, and on Rosh Hashanah, we're told that God remembered them and opened their womb and they become pregnant. Rosh Hashanah, Yatsa Yosef mibeit Asur. Rosh Hashanah, Yosef was released from jail.
How do we know this?
How do we know this?
Yeah.
He has an oral tradition. I have no idea what the basis for that is.
Yeah, I was wondering that myself.
Yeah. Whether this is historically the date that Yosef came out of jail was Rosh Hashanah, or there's something about him being released from jail that is thematically connected to Rosh Hashanah, I'm not totally sure. I'm not entirely sure. I don't know on what basis he makes this assertion, but this is his assertion. So if this is indeed the case, that Yosef was released on Rosh Hashanah, we have a serious problem with the pasuk that we just read about Yosef.
I'm listening to him. Yeah.
Because what does the pasuk tell us about Yosef?
He got a haircut on Rosh Hashanah.
Say again?
He got a haircut on Rosh Hashanah.
He got a haircut and he shaved on Rosh Hashanah. Can we do that?
Probably if you're dragged before the king, you don't have much choice.
He didn't do it. It was done for him.
So you guys are already solving our halachic difficulty. So first we have to present the problem. We have to create a problem first. And the problem is that Rosh Hashanah is a yontif. It's a full-fledged yontif, and malacha, all acts of work are forbidden. And so therefore it would be very problematic to get a haircut or to shave oneself on Rosh Hashanah. So how is Yosef able to do that? That is our halachic conundrum from which we're all going to jump, which is going to be our jumping off point. So I believe Gary already told us the answer that Rashi provides. Vayigalach, he shaved, or he got a haircut, mipnei kavod ha-malchut, because he was coming before the king. And it would be disrespectful to come before the king with unshaven or without a haircut, unkempt hair. So because he's coming before the king, that's why he was able to do so. Okay, Arthur.
Also, I think maybe since he was taken out of a dungeon, changing his clothes would also be appropriate, as he said.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with change. There's no halachic issue with changing one's clothes.
It wasn't until Matan Torah that day was set as Rosh Hashanah.
Okay, so that's always a question when these things come up. What are you talking about? There was no Torah, right? The Torah wasn't given yet. There was no Rosh Hashanah. There certainly was no halachic prohibition against shaving. Yes, that's another common answer to this question. And if you're asking the question, you kind of can't give that answer, right? Either you take it seriously or you don't. So if you're asking the question, that answer is not going to satisfy you. But on a very technical, right, Jeff, back to last week, you gave us the pshat. There is no question to ask because there was no Rosh Hashanah, there was no Isser Malacha. But let's assume for a second that there is.
Well, were the 2 days Rosh Hashanah back
Ah,
then?
so that's another question. Was it 2 days? Presumably not.
Yeah. So maybe it's the second day Rosh Hashanah.
Maybe it was the set. Well, maybe there wouldn't have been a second day. So yeah, and it's interesting, right? One of the Mishnah in Moed Katan, which talks about whether you're allowed to do any of these things on Kol HaMoed, shave, take a haircut. One of the categories of people that are allowed to get a haircut on Kol HaMoed is someone who's released from jail. So there is some interesting connection, but Rosh Hashanah, there is no Kol HaMoed. Maybe the second day, Gary, that I haven't seen anyone make that suggestion. I'm sure someone does. And if not, we'll attribute it to Gary's shot here, is that it was the second day, which is a Dirabanan. So therefore, maybe that's why he was allowed to do it. Okay. So anyway, so we have this halachic issue. If we take the Gemara seriously, if we take it literally, it raises this interesting. Again, I don't know that anyone thinks this is truly, an issue that Yosef had to contend with, but for us in hindsight, it creates an interesting, at least a theoretical discussion, if not a practical one. So the Chatam Sofer says as follows. We're going to see a lot of Chatam Sofer tonight. Tell me when I need to scroll down to the next page in the English. Vayigalach, vayichalef silotav yavo paro. He quotes the pasuk. Here's Rashi b'shvil kavod hamalchut. So Rashi says it's because he was coming before the king. Yesh lefaresh al pi ma shamru perek hamad Rosh Hashanah Rosh Hashanah yatsa Yosef mibeit hasurim. So he quotes the Gemara we just saw. Right, what's Rashi talking about? Why does he need the justification of he's coming before the king in order to take a haircut? He says it must be because Rashi is concerned with the Gemara we saw that Yosef was released on Rosh Hashanah, and normally we don't take a haircut on Rosh Hashanah. Yosef kiyama Torah ad shelo nitna kasher yivar od lekaman. Right? Yosef, we have to accept or assume, fulfilled or kept the entire Torah even before it was given, as will be explained. So if that's the case, how could he have allowed himself to get a haircut on Yom Tov? That's why Rashi said that there was an overriding principle of kavod malchut, of showing honor and respect to the king. Okay, so the way that this is typically understood is that, and it gets into another interesting topic of conversation, which I believe we've touched on also in previous shiurim, certainly over my years as the rabbi with Netivot Shalom. No one told me to scroll the page down. Is a question of natural morality. Is the question of, is there any rules, any laws, any set of principles that one has to follow, independent of what the Torah says? Right? So is there anything that would hold true, even if the Torah didn't tell us? But one of the classic examples of this, when we teach our kids not to steal, not to take someone else's toy on the playground, not to steal their snack from someone else's lunchbox, do we tell them they can't do it because Hashem said it's usher? Or do we tell them don't do it because it's not nice and you don't want anyone else to do that to you? So halachically speaking, we're supposed to give answer number one. We're supposed to say, don't do this because it's a mitzvah, it's an avera. God said don't do it. But that's not a very effective pedagogical approach. And so we can't, even though theologically and philosophically, the reason is it's a prohibited act to do because the Torah says it's prohibited, we can say it's not nice and you wouldn't want anyone to do that to us. But it gets into the question of, are there any binding rules that apply before the Torah was given? So that's what the Chatam Sofer says is Rashi's claim. Rashi's claim is that there's some overriding principle that was in play. Later on, the Chatam Sofer goes on to say, if Yosef did keep the Torah, he didn't keep it out of a sense of obligation, but he kept it out of a sense of this is the right thing to do. He had some prophecy. This is what God is going to command our future generations. I want to experience that. I want to live as God ultimately wants us to live. So I'm going to voluntarily keep the Torah, but there was an overriding rule, universal, humanistic need to show respect to the king. That's how the Chatzim Sofer understands what's going on.
Oh,
On
here's
page
where the
2.
questions are. I know. I'll turn it back over.
Okay. Any questions or thoughts
If-
on this?
If the Rebbeim were frowned upon Yosef for asking the cupbearer to be his messenger, they could also frown upon him for from what he did for the king, for the shaving and all that,
Yeah.
break
Yeah.
Bracha to be nice to the king.
Okay. That's another answer. That's another answer to the question. Maybe he was wrong. He shouldn't have gotten a haircut. Just as-
Maybe he had no choice. After all, he is in Egypt. He's just released from prison and he was going to go before the Pharaoh. And maybe there were other circumstances where prisoners went from one to the other. I don't know. And maybe this was what they did. And he was not necessarily an independent agent.
Right. So some justify it by saying, I think Arthur said this earlier, that maybe, there was a barber who cut his hair. He didn't do it himself, and maybe that's that makes it acceptable when there's some other overriding principle or extenuating circumstances at play.
That's what the Hebrew says, Vayigalach. It's not, it's not that he did it. Somebody did it to him.
Yigalach within.
Vayigalach.
So you're saying that's a nifal?
Yeah.
Okay, it's possible. How would you say? Vayitzkaleach, I guess would be.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So good. So good. The next set of sources is kind of like just takes this a little deeper. I don't think we need to go into all of them in depth. But the basic sources 5 through 8 are basically showing that, well, that explanation of Rashi doesn't quite work because showing honor to our king is in fact a Torah commandment. It is something that we're obligated in. So the prohibition against a haircut and the requirement to show honor to a king should be on equal footing. So therefore, it's still a problem. Okay, but our key source for this section is number 9. Okay, so this is Rabbi Feldman quoting Rav Simcha Zissel Broid, the late Rosh Yeshiva of the Hebron Yeshiva. He posits a number of theories explaining its importance, the importance of kavod hamalchut, showing honor and respect to a king. Just as a side, right, one of my favorite kavod melech example of showing kavod to the king is when Shai Agnon received the Nobel Prize. Famously, in front of a world audience, he made the bracha that one makes upon seeing a king. And that was a very powerful moment for those in the know and for everyone, the overwhelming majority of people who had no idea what was going on. I guess it's a good
I remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, when it comes to kavod malchut, Simcha Zissel Broid gives a few explanations, and among the 5 points that he makes is what he considers a fundamental principle of the human personality.
What personality?
Human.
It is crucial for one's spiritual development that he possess the ability to appreciate great things. One who is jaded and cynical, who views all things with disinterest, is unable to attain any kind of meaningful spiritual maturity. Thus, it is critical to hone one's awareness of the extraordinary, and the attribute one brings towards royalty is certainly reflective of this vital attribute. Okay, so again, separate question about whether we can delve into Tamei HaMitzvot, whether we can discern any reason or logical explanation for the mitzvot that we observe. So let's assume for a second we can. So one reason why we have a mitzvah to show honor to a king, right? one could certainly say that it's out of self-interest that you don't want the king to harm you or punish you for not showing honor to the king, as kings often do. But that aside from whatever external fear there is, that there is something about being able to appreciate greatness and appreciate, and so he puts appreciating royalty into this category.
Rabbi,
Yes.
didn't you, on the Devar Torah, didn't you teach us that if we can, when we really appreciate something, really amazed or something, really have that great passion about something, that it's from Hashem.
Yeah, for sure. So there is an element of I don't want to say divinity, and that not only because it's theologically wrong, but there's also a complicated history. But the powers that kings have, right, does give some intimation of, right, there's a reason why in Rosh Hashanah we are so honed in on king imagery, right? Not only because God is the ultimate king, but we appreciate God through the way that humans treat human kings.
Oh, okay, getting back to the Nobel Prize, is there any difference between a constitutional monarch and a king that can say off with his head?
Yeah, so that's a good question. People ask whether bracha should be said upon seeing a president or seeing a prime minister.
Or the king of Sweden?
The king of Sweden. So generally they say that what it means to be a king is to have the power of life and death. Exactly as you said, to say off with your head.
Right, and the king of Sweden just doesn't have that power.
Right. So I don't want to get into Shayagnon, but it's maybe for a different time we'll find opportunity to explore that notion of Kavod Malchus and the bracha that said. But it's a good question.
And would
Rabbi? Oh,
the ruler of North Korea essentially be a king as far as brachas are concerned?
So certainly if we think about it as the power of life and death, then yes. Yes.
Our president can excuse somebody of a murder charge.
Right, but our
Right.
president can't put someone to death.
No, but
Without
the
checks and
opposite he
balances
can
in
do.
place.
Yeah.
Right.
President can order the death of individuals, and they do. The CIA is empowered, and they have done that, at least outside the United States. Even sometimes an American citizen, that becomes an iffy thing.
Right, but I mean, there
when-
has to be
yeah.
justification, and they will face ramifications if they weren't justified. At least in
But
theory.
we have the concept of the king has virtually absolute authority.
Mhm.
And so when somebody can't be tried under halachic legal standards,
Right.
then Shlomo HaMelech or whoever's the king at the time has the power, the right to decide things differently
Correct.
without needing a witness or two witnesses and
Correct.
so on.
And so there's another related topic. We're touching on a lot of really big topics tonight. But right, the question about how that apply, right, is that specific to the king and to the direct word of the king, or if in a democratic state, if the laws that are passed by the governing body would be considered din malchus. Is a really interesting discussion with much practical ramifications for the status of law in Israel, the halachic status in law in the modern day state of Israel. Fascinating topics. We'll touch on some of these. Dan, you've been waiting very patiently.
thank you. I thought of a contact with the Noahide laws, and it bears on something that Gary said about Constitution and about just this recent argument also, okay? In the ancient Near East, all right, the Sumerians and the Babylonians, the Assyrians, and the Egyptians, for sure, declared that either that they're Nazis, remember the earliest institution was that of the Nasi with the Sumerians, and that is a person who receives the moral order by law from the deity. That, and as well as being in charge of an army, is his identity. we think of kings in the Bronze Age as being basically a set of warriors, and they were, for sure, they had to be, but not in the ancient Near East. They had a reception of the moral order and an obligation to extend the moral order. And certainly the Egyptian monarch did also, the pharaohs did also. So perhaps we can say that for us, the one who is in charge of enforcing the moral order, that has, the Torah has something to do with the amount of honor that we show to a king. Can we slip it in that way? What do you think?
Possibly. So
Because the Noahide
we-
laws are to set up a courts of justice.
all right, so I
and-
believe we touched on this a couple weeks ago. All the weeks
Yeah.
went together in my mind. So,
Yeah,
but,
yeah, okay.
but there is a debate about whether the requirement of B'nai Noach to establish dinim, to establish courts, is a broad-reaching court system that addresses all matters of human interaction and commerce and whatever, or if it's specific to enforce the 6 other Noahide laws.
Uh-huh.
That's another big debate, so that might have some bearing on your question.
Okay.
But anyway, we'll leave it as a good question in Sarich Iyun. We'll have to find an occasion to revisit this. What does any of this have to do with Hanukkah? I told you that this is primarily going to be a Hanukkah. I mean, this is a great discussion on Yosef. Before we go to Hanukkah, you guys think this is a pshat-based approach that we've been taking, or is this far removed from pshat, from Pshuto Shel Mikra?
No, it's
No,
still close.
This is not shock. Should be. It's all based on the premise that Joseph got out of jail, prison on Rosh Hashanah, and there's no scriptural foundation for this at all.
Okay. That was just a food for thought question. But so our connection is going to begin with a different source of the Chatam Sofer. This is from one of his responsa. Okay, so this is source number 10. I'll display the English and I'll read the Hebrew. Harambam Katav, Rosh Perakei Mitani, Yesh Yamim Shechoiso Mitanim Bahem, Mipnei Hatzarot Sheyiru Bahem, Kedei Le'orer HaLevavot, Liftoach Darchei HaTshuva. So the Rambam writes in the 5th chapter of the laws of fasting that there are days on which we fast in order to arouse our hearts to engage in a process of tshuva. Right, and this is a way to remind us of what we did that was wrong and what our ancestors did that was wrong. That hopefully we should repent for the better. Okay, we'll skip to where the Chatan Sofer picks up. Hine gilalanu, mashalo hayinu ma'alim al da'atenu. So the Rambam here, the Chatan Sofer writes, has given us a tremendous chiddush, a tremendous new way of understanding what a fast is all about. Shayinu choshvim shataniyot halalu einam al derech hatshuva ela al haderech ha'evel v'hatzar b'yom she'ira ra k'mo hasimcha b'yom she'ira tova. We would have thought that the fast days are days of mourning and commemorating the horrible thing that happened historically on that day. In the same way that we mark an anniversary of a celebratory event for the good that happened, that's what we would have thought a fast day is. Skip because it just gets a little confusing. Mikol makom hodienu harambam delokenu. But the Rambam says that's an incorrect understanding of what a fast day is all about. Al piv nahagu lomar viduim v'slichot b'tanai yamim. And because of the Rambam, we say vidui, confession, and prayers of penitence of slichot on those days. Yishum shnikbru al hatshuva, because the fast day was really established to bring us to do repentance. Okay, so the Rambam gives us a chiddush that fast days are about repentance. This is all kind of background to where he's going. Mikol makom lo hodienu nosei kelav minalan. Right, but no one knows his source for this. No one's able to see where the Rambam gets this from. Lichora hainu mishum imke minalam anavim lechadesh davar shalom atzinu kayotze bo b'Torah. So maybe one explanation is that how could the prophets institute a fast day which has no basis in the Torah? And this is the key line for us. Okay, so maybe the only way that we get to the Rambam telling us that fast days are about tshuva is because we have no other basis to justify fast days having been instituted. But if we can attach it to tshuva, so tshuva is a biblical mitzvah, maybe under the rubric of tshuva, we can find some biblical basis, some basis for the fast days. Okay, but he says this is the key, this is key. Bishlama likboa yom simcha b'yom tova kigon Chanukah upurim deoraita hu mikal v'chomer. Granted, right? We can certainly say that to establish a day of celebration, such as Chanukah and Purim, that is biblically mandated. How is that biblically mandated? We have a very famous question we ask about all the time on Chanukah and Purim. How can we say in the bracha, Asher kichanim satavat tzivanu? Right? Tonight, when we lit the candles, we said, "Blessed are you, God, who has commanded us to light the Chanukah candles." Where did God command us? Hanukkah was given after wasn't the thing until after the Torah. So where's the mitzvah? So some say it's because of we have to follow in the ways of the elders, right? So that's the most common explanation. But the Chatam Sofer says no. The basis is a kal vachomer, an a fortiori argument. Mishibud ligeula omim shira bepesach, mimita lachayim lo kol shekain. If on Pesach we say Hallel to God for having redeemed us from slavery, all the more so we should say Hallel to God. We should thank God for having saved us from a situation of near certain death. Okay, that's the Kal Vachomer. And a Kal Vachomer, he says, is one of the biblical exegetical principles that has a status of being from the Bible, not being a rabbinically derived thing, but it has the status of a deoraisa. Okay?
So we say God commanded us to light candles because we're saying Hallel?
No, not exact. No, not because we're saying Hallel, but we have to recognize, we have to, right? The light, he would say, right? He would say, this is overly simplifying, but he would say that lighting candles is a manifestation of Hallel. Just like on Pesach, drinking the 4 cups of wine is a manifestation of Hallel. Lighting candles is a manifestation of that general principle of Hallel, of praising and thanking God, which is embodied in the saying of Hallel.
But in Purim, we don't light candles and we don't say Hallel.
We read the Megillah.
Yeah.
Megillah, the Gemara tells us explicitly that reading the Megillah is the Hallel of Purim. Okay? This is like many steps. There's a lot of, this is kind of halachically accepted as given, but you're right. There's a lot of holes that we can poke in every step here. Okay, so we're good. We can identify some of those holes, but we're going to more or less let's just see the idea fully developed, and then we can see if we still want to poke holes or not. Okay, and so then he continues. Umasha katavnu de perm v'chanukah v'chayim megilatani la'asot zeichel anes mimavet l'chaim hu deoraita mamish mikal v'chomer ita parakama de Megillah. So this idea that the celebration of Chanukah and Purim and other days that we think are rabbinic really are deoraita, really are biblically mandated, is explained further in the first chapter of Masechet Megillah, Ayin Rambam. So Ramban, so Shoresh Bet, Mikol Makom Hainu Lasot Shum Zecher Lenes. About Ichud V'Kamud HaZikaron Arhu Humi Durabanan. Right, so he says the biblical mandate would be just to somehow give recognition to it. But all the details, that certainly is Durabanan. Lighting 1 candle, then 2 candles, or however many candles we light, right? Saying the exact words of Hallel, that all those details certainly are Durabanan. The Deoraita mandate would be simply to recognize in some way that it is the anniversary of this event. Okay, so it's a radical idea that he's giving us here. that there is a deoraita element to Chanukah, right? And add to that Purim and other rabbinic days. Anyone want to connect this to Yosef? Source number 11. Perhaps the common element between the two statements of the Chatam Sofer, his comment regarding Yosef and his assertion regarding Chanukah, is the fundamental necessity of cultivating an appreciation for greatness and majesty. One who is unreceptive to the miraculous and the majestic is incapable of approaching Torah with any potential for success. If one is unmoved by the extraordinary, then the greatest gift of all eternity can fail to move and inspire, not only for any internal deficiency in the item, but because of the closed eye of the beholder. Okay, so Yosef gives us the idea of Kavod Melech, of showing honor and respect to the king, which, as we saw, is a way of showing an ability to appreciate greatness and splendor. And so too in Hanukkah, we have to be able to appreciate the greatness and the good that God did for us. That's the connection he wants to say between Yosef and Hanukkah.
It's a strange connection. Somebody who was present and witnessed the parting of the sea, somebody who witnessed the revelation at Sinai individually and remembers it, that person is affected by the majestic nature of that experience, that event that is witnessed. They feel it, and they have the possibility of transmitting at least a part of that feeling.
Okay.
By talking about it, by teaching about it.
Right.
And so as we learn about it, Chazal and their successors up till today are doing the same task. There's a matter of teaching that's involved to make people perceive what is amazing, what is remarkable. The fact that the planet is spinning at 25,000 miles an hour, or whatever the speed is on its axis, that the planet is moving at 65,000 or 100,000 miles an hour as well, and we're not falling off. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I would.
We don't
But in any case, the sense of wonder, the sense of appreciation will be transmitted. To have to argue appreciation for majestic this and that. Paro Melech Mitzrayim was an evil, nasty, terrible ruler.
Yeah.
If their record is horrible, but they were
go
powerful.
back
and they were
back to
useful.
those sources we skipped over. I think it was 5 through 8. The Medrash in source number 8 tells us it's a remarkable Medrash. So let's go back and look at it for a second. So the Medrash tells us this is when Moshe and Aaron are talking with Paro and his advisors in the course of the 10 Makot, of the 10 plagues. So God tells Moshe to go back to Paro. This is right before Makat Bechorot, right before the slaying of the firstborn. Amar lahem HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Heyuno hagin bo kavod, v'chilko kavod l'malchut. Af al pi shani tzarich lasot bo et hadin. Moshe and Aaron, when you speak to Paro, you have to show kavod to him. You have to show honor to the kingdom, to the kingship, even though I'm going to exact judgment from him. Even though he's about to be punished and smitten and all the horrible stuff that's happening to him, as humans, you have an obligation to show honor to the king. That's what God tells Moshe. Okay, so it's a remarkable source, right? Many dictators still around in the world. If we were ever to come into to interact with any of them, I would certainly be trembling out of fear. But is there any obligation to show respect to them? So Hashem is telling Moshe, Paro, who's the most evil of all, right? You have to show him kavod.
This is basically saying that revolution is usher.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. That's an interesting point. Is revolution always usher? So presumably there has to be, yeah, I don't know what the limits are. It's a good question.
Well, wasn't Yetziat Mitzrayim a kind of revolution too?
Yes, yes. So maybe we could say
Yeah.
that revolution, or is not always usher, but it has to be done in a covetic way. How you do that, I don't know exactly.
Mhm.
I don't know. It's just sound.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Okay, let's skip ahead, and this ties in very nicely, I think, with what Robert was just saying. So one more Hanukkah connection. Okay, well, we're going to skip over those other sets of sources. I promise you will have some occasion to learn them together at some point. But we'll see what. But let's go to the final set of sources, starting with number 16, the Beit Yosef. So in all of the studies of Hanukkah, this is probably the most famous question of Hanukkah. Okay, it's a famous. You just say the Hanukkah question of the Beit Yosef. Anyone who spent even 5 minutes in yeshiva will probably know what you're talking about, or at least remember what you're talking about once you tell them what the question is. The Beit Yosef says as follows: what was the miracle of Hanukkah?
They found
your
the
question?
jug of oil.
Finding the oil.
They find a jug of oil. The jug of oil has enough oil
With
for
with the seal of the
One
high
day.
priest on it.
one
Mhm.
pure jug of oil. It has enough oil for one day. They light the oil in the jug, and it lasts for
8 days.
8 days.
Yeah.
What's the miracle of Hanukkah? How many days is the miracle?
8 days.
7.
7
It's
days.
8 days.
You're already going to get to
because-
the answer, Robert, because you spent too much time learning. We have to remember, we have to get the questions out first.
Okay,
Okay.
the question is, why
I
did they
promise
even
you, Robert, we'll
look?
let you answer it. What's the question? The question is, there was enough oil for one day. So there's nothing miraculous about the first day. Only the next 7 days are miraculous. That's the question of the Beit Yosef. Robert, shut it down.
It has to last for the 8 days, and even that they found one day's supply is miraculous, and that it ends up lasting 8 days, long enough to get whatever properly supervised with an OU or whatever on it, and that's the seal on it. It's
Okay.
remarkable.
Okay.
Okay, so number one, maybe the miracle is that they even had enough oil to light one day, that they were able to find one jug of oil. Just finding it was the miracle. That's the miracle we celebrate on the first day. The Beit Yosef himself offers 3 answers to this question. One, you could say, well, knowing that it takes them 8 days to produce oil, they divvied up what they had. They didn't put all the oil in the menorah on the first day, but they only put 1/8 of the oil because they knew they wanted to at least have some symbolic lighting each of the 8 days until they had a new supply. So even on the first day, it was only 1/8 of what normally would have lasted all day. So even on the first day, there was the same miracle. Second, he says that it was similar. They filled the menorah on the first day, and then miraculously the jug refilled itself. It never ran empty, even though it only seemed to hold enough oil for one day. Or the third is that they different permutation of that is that they poured all the oil. The jug was empty after the first day, but somehow on day 2 there was still oil left in the menorah to light again. Okay, so those are the 3 answers he gives. There's actually Sfarim. There's a Sefer which offers 100 answers to this question. Okay, so there are many, 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 many answers. The answer I wanted to give tonight, which I think connects to what we've seen so far, is based on the explanation of the Ramban. The Ramban talking about the nature of miracles. Okay, the Ramban says there's 2 types of miracles. Okay, there's the big time miracles. Kriyas Yamsuf, the splitting of the sea, oil lasting for 8 days when it should only last for 1 day. That's a big time miracle. But he says that these big time miracles aren't serving a purpose in themselves. It's not just, wow, this amazing thing happened. But what's the point of the big time, the nisim gdolim u'meforsamim, as he says, the great open miracles? Min hanisim hagdolim ha'meforsamim, Adam modeh benisim hanistarim, shehem yisod haTorah kula. When we see an amazing miracle take place, when we see something that never should happen, that tunes us in to all the minor miracles that are taking place around us all the time. Okay, that we need sometimes a great miracle to sensitize us to the not so obvious miracles that are taking place. Right, last night I took my kids to get their second vaccine. So
Yay.
we're celebrating the Hanukkah miracle of science and the
celebration,
doctors,
yeah.
right? Thank God everyone on this call has gotten their vaccine. Some of us maybe had our boosters already, right? But that in the course of 1 year, that the scientists and the pharmaceutical companies and everyone else was able to develop a vaccine is a miracle. Yeah, we might be able to explain it, that there's a scientific process and computers and research and whatever, but it's a miracle. And so sometimes we lose sight of those seemingly minor miracles because we're so focused, because we just it happens too frequently. So from time to time, we need a major miracle to remind us about all the minor miracles that are happening all the time. And that, the Ramban says, is the point, is the purpose of a miracle. Okay? And that is another answer that many have suggested to the question of the Beit Yosef. Yes, it's miraculous that the oil lasted for 7 extra days. You want to know what else is a miracle? That oil burns at all. That we, figured it out, that God created the world in a way in which we can take this fruit, this olive, press it down, extract some oil, and boom, we have fire, right? That this in itself is a miracle. And so we needed the 7 days subsequently to help us appreciate the great miracle of the world around us and all the miracles that take place in nature, quote, on a regular basis. That's what many want to explain or answer the question of the Beit Yosef. Why do we celebrate 8 days and not 7 days? Because we need to be appreciative not only of the great explicit miracles, but also of the more hidden miracles that might be taken for granted. And so I think that ties back to what we were saying about Yosef and what we were saying about the Chatam Sofer's explanation of Hanukkah, that it's all about appreciating the greatness. That Yosef teaches us the yesod, the principle of kavod malchus, showing honor for a king, because we need that as humans. We need to be able to appreciate grandness and splendor and royalty, right? Even we can add, even in the case of a bad king, of an evil, a cruel person, still, if they have these elements of authority and rulership, that in itself is something that we have to at least show kavod to. We have to show honor to and respect, even if we don't like it, even if we have issues with it. And on Hanukkah, right, that there is some element of a deoraita, of a biblical commandment to celebrate Hanukkah, because the Torah tells us we have to always show appreciation for the good and the miraculous that was done to us. And so these 3 things come together. I hope they come together. For me, they come together to paint a really, to give what I hope is a meaningful message about Hanukkah. That yes, it's about the oil, it's about the military victory. It's also about appreciating all the amazing things that happen in the world around us all the time. And we celebrate this grand miracle on Hanukkah in order to sensitize us to the other miracles in our lives as well.
Very good. Thank you,
Yeah,
Rabbi.
Shapah.
I want to recommend, by the way, the lecture by Rabbi Katz about
Okay.
Hanukkah. It was recorded in about 2005, I think. It's almost 2 hours long, and it's historical about Hanukkah.
Okay.
It's very, very interesting.
All right. Where where is it posted?
Rabbi David Katz.
Okay, thank you.
On,
Thanks for the
on
recommendation.
YouTube, yeah.
On YouTube.
And I listened to Rabbi Allen's lecture too about Hanukkah.
Mhm.
Robert, you mentioned that, didn't you? No, Rabbi Chaim
Chaim
Angel.
Angel
Allen.
in 2013 gave a marvelous talk at a shul somewhere in New York area on multiple explanations given why Hanukkah is observed, why the way in which Chazal have recorded the miracles and so on, and prayers and others seem to downplay the Chashmonayim, downplay a number of things, interestingly, but to upplay some other things. The lecture by Chaim Angel is available at yutorah.org, and there's a search bar. You can put in either a topic or the name of the speaker and get the links to various lectures that are identified. This was very, very good.
Yeah.
About why it's included, why 8 days. It was marvelously enlightening.
All right,
You
thank
said the
you.
thought that if we had respected the Hirohito, the Emperor of Japan,
Mhm.
properly, there would have been no nuclear bomb.
Okay, yes,
Mm.
maybe,
That's-
maybe.
Maybe, yeah.
All right, well,
I just wanted to add that having Thanksgiving so close to Hanukkah is a way of prepping us for this Devar Torah that you gave this evening. I
Yes,
mean,
for
class you gave this
sure.
evening. Yeah.
we'll take it a
it's
step
Very
further.
nice, very nice.
Because what's the original Thanksgiving?
Sukkot. Oh,
The
wait a minute.
Sukkot. And there's a very strong connection between Hanukkah and Sukkot, which I think we explored a little bit last year or 2 years ago. But there's a very strong connection between Hanukkah and Sukkot. So
Yeah.
if we're gonna see Sukkot as a Thanksgiving, then certainly Hanukkah and Thanksgiving are appropriate to be juxtaposed as they are this year.
Mhm.
All right, Lila Tov, everybody. Looking
Lila
forward to seeing you
Tov.
on Shabbos at the Shul Hanukkah party Saturday
Lila
night.
Tov.
Have a good night.
Good
Good
night.
night.
Thank you.
Thank
Lila
you.
Tov.
Good Shabbos.